All right, my friend, let's dive into the indie pop vocal mix. And here is how I structured this, just so you have an idea of what's going on here. So, first, I'm just going to play this so you have a feel for the song.
Jessica, Jessica, oh,
Now, as you can hear, the instrumental sounds pretty good, right? Sounds somewhat mixed, but the vocal sounds very dry, obviously.
won't you stay?
And that's because for this course, so this is a new session that I made specifically for this course and for teaching this material here. What I did is I exported the instrumental by itself. So I muted all the vocal tracks and then I exported just the instrumental by itself because I wanted a clean session. I did not want to make your eyes hurt from going through my old mix session with all the plugins and everything on it and all the tracks because we're only really talking about vocals and we're specifically zooming in on vocal mixing and vocal production. And so I wanted to really clean up the session for you guys. And so that's why I exported just the instrumental here. And then what I did next is I went in and I muted all the plugins, all the reverbs, compressors, EQs, delays, and I exported the dry vocal tracks, including the backgrounds with the doubles here and everything else. Now, the only processing that's on these tracks is anywhere where I used Melodyne or Autotune that is printed onto these tracks already. And that's because honestly, that's more of an editing thing than it is a mixing phase process when it comes to tuning. Tuning, timing, getting rid of noise between phrases, that is all a part of editing, generally speaking. So that's already taken care of. We don't need to worry about tuning, or at least if we do, it'll just be perhaps one or two notes that slipped through the cracks, and then obviously we can adjust anything if we need to at this juncture. So now let's go ahead and let's dive in. Now I'm gonna go ahead and just mute all of the background vocals. And why am I gonna mute all the background vocals? Well, because we're gonna first focus on the lead vocal. So in this video, I am gonna walk you through EQ, compression, and saturation for the lead vocal. Those are sort of the big three that if you can get good at EQ, compression, and saturation, you are off to the races because usually what you add after that is perhaps a reverb or some delay, right? It is amazing how much better your reverbs are going to sound and your delays are going to sound if you can get this part right, the EQ, the compression, and the saturation. So that's why we want to focus on that first before we drench it in some other weird effects. We want to get the foundation in a good place and want to get it right. So here is what it sounds like. I'm going to play this here where the vocal starts in verse 1.
The embers on your tongue, they're burning my eyes. She's the prettiest firefly on fire.
I'm just going to turn it up slightly. That way we can hear it better up against the instrumental mix. And now let's go ahead and dive in. And so I already set up a little bus channel here called the lead vox. So we have the lead vocal track here in purple, which is this track with this audio on it. But as you can see, there's also a lead vocals bus here. Now you might be asking, Marcus, why the heck would you put a lead vocal bus here if there's only one lead vocal track? Just process the lead vocal here. Why send it through a bus? Well, the reason I'm doing that is because there's always the possibility that I might want to send these doubles also through the lead vocal bus. And then I might want to process them all together and make that the lead vocal part of the song, even though there are doubles there. I could process them perhaps as one cohesive sound. Sometimes I do it that way, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'll just process the doubles on their own bus and the lead vocal on its own bus. But even if there ends up only being one lead vocal sent through the lead vocal bus, I still like using a bus. And so that is what I'm going to do. So the lead vocal, instead of going directly to the main output, like all of these others are, at least for now, I am sending it first through the lead vocals bus, and then it's going to the main output. So that is what this says. Main, main, main. These are going directly to the main output. Main lead vocal means it's first getting sent through this bus and then to the main output. So we can process now the lead vocal bus, and that's going to process the lead vocal track. Makes sense? Okay. Now the big question is, where do we start? So obviously, as I've already mentioned, we're going to talk about EQ, we're going to talk about compression and saturation. So which should we start with? Well, let's talk about just EQ and compression specifically. We'll get into saturation here in a few minutes. Should you start with EQ or should you start with compression? That's the question that I'm going to answer here for you. I would say in some ways it really doesn't matter. My preferred approach is to start with compression unless, and this is a big unless the vocal track has a glaring problem that needs to be fixed. So let's say the vocal track sounds very muddy or sounds way too bright or tinny in the top end, or it has way too much boominess. Whatever the case, if there are any specifically annoying parts of the vocal in terms of EQ, then by all means start with the EQ and then add compression after. But
Won't you stay? Oh, Jessica,
like when I listen to this vocal, I'm not hearing any glaring issues in terms of EQ.
before you say goodbye, stay a while.
Like it sounds relatively balanced already, right? Which is good. And so because of that, I'm going to start with compression and I'm going to walk you through my process for compressing this type of vocal. So now I could start with just a regular stock looking compressor like this. However, I've started to really fall in love with using almost exclusively analog model plugins, like I'm about to show you here. So here inside of Studio One, there's this plugin called the Fat Channel, which is sort of I think the Waves SSL plugin, I think it's called. I haven't ever used it, but I've seen other people use it. I think that is kind of the same concept where you have an EQ and a compressor and a gate all in the same plugin, and then you can turn them off or on. And then here you even have different compressors that you can choose from. You can choose a tube compressor, you can choose a FET compressor, which is an 1176 style, and all these other ones. Just incredible sounding compressors. They all sound different. And I'm going to start with, here, let me narrow this down to just the compressor. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with this exact compressor, this FET 1176 style compressor. So this is based on an 1176 compressor from the old days. And the reason that I'm starting with this type of compressor is because this compressor has a very fast attack, which is good for this purpose because the first thing we need to do in terms of compressing this vocal is we need to bring this volume level of the vocal
On fire.
closer to this volume.
Goodbye, stay a while.
Because as of right now, it's da da da, and then the other one is way back here, right? There's such a big gap in terms of the volume from here to
Say
here.
good.
Now, we don't need to make them exactly equal, but we do want to we want to rein it in so that the lead vocal can be present and can be heard from the start of the song all the way to the end of the song. And that is a big role that compression plays in your vocal. Now, it's not just compression. We also can do things like volume automation and turning up the volume of the vocal using like a fader, for example, and making maybe the verse a little louder and then the chorus not as loud if there are other backgrounds or doubles already involved. And then maybe in the last chorus, when everything gets big, you need to turn all the vocals up using volume automation. But we want to first get it closer using compression. Okay. So that is the purpose of this compressor. That is my thought process. I want a fast attack compressor. And anytime when you have an 1176 style FET compressor like this, that is a great place to start. So that is why I'm going to use this compressor. And this compressor, speaking of, now when I say this is a fast attack compressor, I mean fast attack, because at its fastest, so this is at its fastest on the attack knob here at 0.02 milliseconds. The slowest it goes is 0.8 milliseconds. So basically 1 millisecond. And if you look at a typical stock compressor, 1 millisecond is here. So it only goes from here to here, essentially, like from here to here. None of this is even available on an 1176 style compressor. So that's just a little insight for you when you're trying to choose your compressors, especially when you have perhaps these analog modeled compressors. Really educate yourself on what the texture is and what the tonality of the different compressors are and what they bring to the table. So Let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and start messing with the knobs here as I'm playing the vocal, and I'll start to dial in some compression. Here we go.
On your
I'm going to actually
tongue
start here.
right now. Won't you stay? Well, Jessica, Jessica. Oh, yeah. Won't you stay? Oh, Jessica, Jessica. Oh, yeah. Before you say goodbye, stay a while. Before you say goodbye, stay a while. Before you say goodbye, you'll fly on fire. She's on fire. For the sirens call.
Okay, this is really, really close to what I want here. This is generally what it should look like. So notice what's happening here. On the softer parts of this vocal, there's barely compression happening, right?
On fire.
On occasion,
She's on
it kisses
fire.
the compressor and maybe goes 1, 2,
For
or
the
3 dB at the most.
sirens call.
For the sire, on the sire, then it did compress it down to about 3 dB here.
Just the stillness.
There it's not even compressing it. So that is generally, because this is the quietest part of the vocal, that is generally what you want it to do. Not compress the whole time, but still on certain words, still have enough compression where it is still kissing it at times. Now watch what happens when we get to the chorus and we get to the louder parts.
Well, Jessica, Jessica.
It's working much harder.
Oh, yeah. Won't you stay?
So there it's hanging around 3, 4, 5 dB a lot of the times, and then on the louder notes there, it's even hitting 7 or 8 dB of gain reduction. Now, watch what happens here.
Before you say goodbye, stay a while. Before you say goodbye.
So we're really pushing 7, 8 dB on those louder parts, and it's really shooting those down and bringing everything into a tighter, more balanced sound.
Stay a while. Before you say goodbye, stay a while.
Now, notice how I have the release at the fastest it goes, which is 50 milliseconds, and then the attack I just went kind of right in the middle. As we talked about, the attack, it's going to be a fast attack regardless of where you put it. However, the release on this is very much, that is not the case. You can go very slow with this release, 1.1 second. And I want to show you this because this is not what you want to have on your vocal. I want you to watch this VU meter, watch this needle, and notice how it never really comes back to 0.
You say goodbye, stay a while.
It stays up here. Versus, watch this.
Before you say goodbye, stay a while.
That is a huge difference because notice how this needle is shooting back as soon as that loud part of the vocal is no longer there. The compressor lets go of that audio and it just lets it come back to its normal state. And you want that especially on a vocal because a vocal is such a dynamic instrument. It is such a transparent instrument. And so you want the compressor to really feel like it is following the natural timbre and the natural way that a vocal works and that how it sounds and how
you say goodbye, stay a while.
So you want to be careful when it comes to using slow release times. Don't go too slow with your release time. You want that needle to be coming back to 0 pretty quickly. You don't want it to hang out like this.
Before you say goodbye,
it just never comes back to 0.
While.
You want it to come back to 0.
Before you say goodbye, stay a while.
Because then it is responding like very accurately to exactly where the lead vocal is at any given millisecond. Okay, so I think that's good. So now I'm gonna go ahead and turn this compressor off. So here's before.
Before you say goodbye, stay a while.
And then here's after.
Before you say goodbye, stay a while.
So much, we've added some beefiness to the tone, right? We've added some punchiness to it. This is why I love these types of compressors. It's just they have such a cool sound, especially because not only do they turn down the volume very efficiently and effectively on those loud peaks, it shoots them down, gets everything into more of a balanced volume overall from the quietest part to the loudest part. But another thing it does is it adds this really nice tone and texture and punchiness to the vocal as well. So double win. I love the way that this compressor sounds. So now that we have that
I
first
know.
compressor in, where should we go next? I know I'm probably going to add one more compressor at least at some point, but I think we're good for now because I think the next thing I want to focus on is actually EQ before we add anything else. So now I'm going to come over here and actually stay in the fat channel and use the same plugin and hop over to the EQ. So let's go ahead and perhaps use the vintage EQ. We'll at least start here and see what we can do.
Say goodbye, stay a while.
So if you're used to using visual EQs, this might look ridiculous to you, and that's fair, but I've actually really started to enjoy these types of EQs in large part because you can't rely on your visual perceptions anymore. You actually have to trust what your ears are telling you, much more so than you would if you were using a visual standard EQ, as most EQs look, or at least the stock EQs often look something like this, right? And there's nothing wrong with these EQs, but I am showing you my process here, and I am a big fan of these more analog modeled EQs with buttons rather than the visual window where you can start to rely on your eyes instead of your ears, which is a pretty ridiculous thing when you think about it, right? Why would you ever let your eyes do the talking when it comes to mixing? It's all about ears. Music has everything to do with how does it sound to your ears. So now let's listen to the vocal. I'm going to turn the vocal and the instrumental on against each other. And the first thing we want to listen for is there a problem that we need to address?
For you say goodbye, stay a while. For you say goodbye, stay a while.
Now, I think there might be a bit of a problem. It isn't crazy, but it's probably going to be either this 220 hertz knob or the 360 hertz knob here that we might want to turn down. So let's start here, and I'm going to go ahead and do the classic. I'll boost it and then I'll bounce around to the different frequencies and we'll see what it sounds like.
Won't you stay? Oh, Jessica, Jessica.
Now let's see what this sounds like.
Oh, won't you stay? Oh, Jessica, Jessica.
Now, when you're doing this, obviously, if you're going to boost these frequencies, it's going to sound pretty gross and disgusting. And that doesn't mean that you need to turn everything down, because it sounds that way because you're boosting it in an unnatural way, and it's creating imbalance because of it. However, what you want to also listen for is when you bounce around the different frequencies, does one sound substantially worse than the others?
Oh, Jessica, Jessica.
And it's, to me, the 360 one sounds pretty drastically worse than these two.
Oh,
Maybe not terribly worse than this one, but it definitely sounds worse than the 1.6K. So with that, we might want to do just a little cut here in the 360 hertz range.
won't you stay?
Here, I'm going to go ahead and turn this vocal up a little bit so we can hear it a little better against the mix.
Oh, yeah. For you say goodbye, stay a while. For you say goodbye, stay a while.
It got rid of some of the won't. Really listen to it. It's pretty subtle, but here's before.
For you say goodbye, stay a while.
Isn't that crazy? It sounds like we boosted the highs. It sounds like we added a bunch of high into it, and all we did is removed 2.5 dB around 360 hertz. So just so you have an idea of what that looks like visually, if you were doing this on an EQ that looks like this, it would be around 360. Let me move this up here. 360 is around here, and then it would be something kind of like that. right? That is what the cut looks like, about 2.5 dB in the low mid range, around 3 to 400 hertz. So let's go ahead, turn that off, remove that. We'll come back to this EQ again. So now let's see if there are any other aspects of the EQ spectrum of this vocal that need to be addressed. So let's listen.
This is all no, what she's doing here anyway. Won't you stay?
So now I'm going to bounce around in this range up here. I'm going to boost it and see if there are particular frequencies we might like or dislike, and then we'll see if we want to either boost or cut something.
Jessica, Jessica, oh, won't you stay? Oh, Jessica, Jessica.
Now, we are going to do some de-essing here in a bit, so don't mind the S's too much.
Oh, yeah. For you say goodbye, stay a while. For you
I don't know, I'm having a hard time deciding whether I want to cut at 3K or at 4.8K.
say goodbye, stay a while. For you say goodbye, stay a while.
Yeah, I think I want to make a little cut here at the 3K range. So
This is all I ask of you now, Jessica. I don't know what
so the 3K range, it's where you get,
she
especially between 1K and 3K, is often where you get that harshness, that nasality, that brittle. It's just too much popping through the mix, and it kind of hurts your ears if there's too much of it. And so we want to make sure that the vocal is sufficiently warm so that it is the type of song that can be listened to on repeat for 2 hours straight if need be, right? You don't want your vocal to sound too brittle or too harsh. And so one of the best ways that you can add some warmth to your vocals is by not necessarily boosting the low range, although you can certainly do that, but almost a more efficient way is by cutting between 1K and 3K to get rid of some of that excess brightness and harshness that might be there. So I think I'm going to do around a 2 to 3 dB cut here in the 3K range.
is doing here anyway. Won't you stay? Oh, Jessica, Jessica. Oh, won't you stay? Oh, Jessica, Jessica. Oh, yeah. For you say goodbye, stay a while. For you say goodbye, stay a while.
And then I went ahead and did just there in the moment. I thought we could use perhaps a very, very slight cut in the lower range here, around 220. So let's go with that. Now this is a low shelf cut here, but that's not actually that relevant since we're only doing 1 dB cut there anyway. So
For you say goodbye, stay a while.
I think that's all I'm gonna do with this EQ. I think we're sounding good. Now here's before.
Won't you stay?
And there's after.
Jessica, Jessica. Oh,
Here's before.
won't you stay? Oh, Jessica, Jessica.
There's after.
Oh, yeah.
We've definitely cleaned it up a bit. We've gotten rid of some of the mud that was there. And I really like how we are progressing this so far. So far, so good, my friend. We've added some compression using an 1176 style compressor, some EQ. And now, before we move on to anything else, I'm actually going to go ahead, because this is a general thing that I often do with EQ, is I will do something along the lines of perhaps a low cut and maybe even a high cut. Now, I wouldn't necessarily have to do this on this one, I don't think, because I already have a high pass filter or a low cut filter already turned on literally on my interface as I'm recording in. So I have the Apollo Twin by UAD, the interface, and you have the option of adding in the low cut like this and printing that in. So it's running through that so that you're not getting all of these super low frequencies that you don't need anyway. But if you didn't do that, or even if you did, you can always come in here again and just roll off everything from, I would say, around here, maybe 75-ish, all the way up past 100 if you need to. It'll just depend on the vocal. It'll depend on the texture, and do you have low notes that come all the way down here? Then you don't want to come all the way up here. But if it's a super airy, maybe female vocal, you could go all the way up to here even if you wanted to. So it's just one of those things you play by ear. But the point is, this range down here below 100 hertz, generally speaking, on a vocal, is not going to add any value to your mix. Specifically, if there is a kick drum in the mix, if there is a bass guitar in the mix, anything that has those low frequencies, this is where those elements live, and you don't need the vocal in there muddying the waters. So that is why this is just a general rule of thumb to roll off everything below somewhere in this range. So I'm just going to do that.
Won't you stay?
And then let's see if we want to roll off just a tiny bit of top end, see if that helps warm up the sound in a pleasing way or not. I think there's a little bit too much of those, those super high frequencies. And so I move this from 12 dB per octave to 6 dB per octave. That way the cut here, or the shelf cut, isn't quite as drastic.
Beautiful.
I think I'll just do something like this.
Right here, right here, right now. Won't you stay? Whoa, Jessica.
So these are both very, very subtle moves, but it is one thing I like to check is low cut, high cut on a standard EQ that looks like this. So we are done with EQ for now. Obviously, we will continue to circle back around. And one point I'll make here too, when it comes to compression, and especially when it comes to EQ on the vocal, since we don't have the rest of the vocals in the mix yet, it will likely happen that I will come back and circle back around and make more EQ adjustments on this vocal as we get new information, as we get more tracks, and as we start to blend the instrumental mix with the backgrounds and the doubles and all of that. So that it's not like you do the compression and then you're done for the rest of the mix, or you do the EQ and then you're done. You try to get it as close as you can, but it is pretty much inevitable that you will circle back and make more adjustments as you continue throughout the process. So we've done some compression, we've done a bit of EQ, and now, my friend, let's add some saturation. This is sort of the missing piece. This is the plugin or the effect that often people just overlook, especially beginners. They know they need to add some EQ, so they add some EQ. They know they should probably add some compression, so they add a compressor plugin. But then they forget about saturation, and maybe it's just because people don't tell them. Maybe educators online just haven't talked about it enough. This is something that I would forget over and over when I was starting out, is I just wouldn't add saturation. And saturation makes such a difference to add some texture and to add some, especially if you're going for a retro sound. Maybe you could add some tape saturation. Maybe if you wanted more of a distorted sound, you can really add some grit and some warmth and some glue to the overall sound of the vocal. So where do we want to go? Let me listen to this.
Jessica, oh, won't you stay? Oh, Jessica.
What I'm going to try first is a bit of tape saturation. So, oh wait, let me see. What am I using here? I guess I'll use the Ozone 9. Yeah, so Ozone 9 has some tape saturation. Now, this is technically a mastering suite, but you can use it just as a regular plugin as well. And I'm just using it here because I want their tape saturator. So I'm going to go with the vintage tape here, and we'll see how that sounds.
Oh, Jessica, Jessica, oh, won't you stay? Oh.
So the bias knob here, or this slider here, makes quite a big difference. Here you have much more low end, and then here there's less low end.
Oh, Jessica, Jessica, oh yeah.
So I think somewhere around there is probably pretty good. And then see what this does.
Before you say goodbye, stay a while.
Yeah, let's crank that. Why not?
Before you say goodbye, stay a while. Before you say goodbye, stay a while. This is all I ask of you now, Jessica. Oh, Jessica. Oh, yeah.
So here's without it.
Before you say goodbye, stay a while.
There's with it. We're adding now. Tape saturation generally is pretty subtle, so I would imagine many of you guys watching this perhaps have the Slate Digital subscription, and they have a very popular tape saturation plugin. So that can work great just to add that subtle warmth and that subtle analog retro feel and sound to your vocals specifically. But obviously you can apply it to any track or even on the master channel in your mix. But here's,
Before you say
because I cranked the input drive here,
goodbye, stay a while.
I'm going to turn down the output
Before
volume.
you say goodbye, stay a while. This is all I ask of you now, Jessica. Won't you stay? Whoa, Jessica, Jessica.
Now, I think what I'm going to do is actually come back to this EQ. I think we need to make another cut in the low or low mids.
Oh, won't you stay? Oh, Jessica, Jessica. Oh, yeah. Before you say goodbye, stay a while.
Just to clean it up even more in the low mid range. And the more you mix vocals, the more you'll realize that the problems tend to rear their ugly heads in the same general areas. It'll often be in the low mid range. Maybe it'll be, for me, it's often in the 2K range or 3K range, like we turned down, where it's a bit too brittle and harsh. And so I'll often turn it down there.
Before you say goodbye, stay a while. Before you say goodbye, stay a while.
You know what?
This is all I ask of you now, Jessica. Before you say goodbye, stay a while. Before you say goodbye.
Yeah, I just felt like I wanted to add a little cut around 2K as well. And now that cut is very specific to my voice. I do that all the time. Right in this range, I'll often make a bit of a cut because it helps retain, or it helps infuse the vocal with a bit more of that warmth, like I talked about earlier, which is very much of a thing. If you turn down this range here on your vocal, it can really help warm it up if it feels like it's just too harsh or too bright or too cutting through the mix and almost hurting your ears because it has that sharp type of quality to it. So here is, again, without the tape saturation.
Stay, whoa, Jessica, Jessica. Oh,
And then here's with it.
won't you stay? Oh, Jessica, Jessica. Oh, yeah. Before you say goodbye, stay a while. Before you say goodbye, stay a while. Before you say goodbye, stay a while.
That's interesting. Notice how the 30 here is much brighter than the 7.5.
This is all I ask of you now, Jessica. Of you breathing slow, she's so beautiful.
I think I like the 15 better, a bit more of a warm tone. So here's without
But
it.
I don't know what she's doing here.
So there we go. I love that. It's a little bit of saturation. And just because you added compression or you added EQ or you added saturation doesn't mean you can't double it and add another form of EQ or another plugin that looks different or that has a different sound or tone, or saturation that has a different sound or tone. And so I'm going to experiment with one more plugin on this lead vocal in terms of saturation, just to see if we can lock it in, or just to see if it sounds good and see if it helps improve this vocal mix overall. So what I'm thinking maybe I could do, let's just try the basic good old saturation knob on this vocal and see if that helps us.
Anyway, won't you stay? Whoa, Jessica, Jessica. Oh, won't you stay? Oh, Jessica. Jessica, Jessica. Oh yeah. For you say goodbye, stay a while. For you say smile on your face.
Love the sound of that. I'm such a fan of the saturation knob. I'm a fan of any plugin that is this easy. You just turn the knob and boom, it does all the work for you. Now, as you saw there, I was messing around with the keep high to neutral to keep low. I thought in neutral and for sure in keep low, it was adding in a bit too much in the low range, which we don't need, at least not right now. I don't feel that. And so I moved this to the keep high setting here. That way the saturation focuses more on the high end. And now what I'm going to do next is actually add, it's called Mix Tool in Studio One, which is just a gain plugin. The reason I'm adding this is simply because saturation knob doesn't have an output gain volume, so which means you can't turn it down after you've done the effect, which is really dumb because here's before. And there's after, and it's way louder, even though we only have it at 9 o'clock. So I want, generally speaking, it's a good idea to kind of have before it goes through a plugin, and then after the plugin, the vocal volume is approximately the same. So let's just do something like that, about 3 dB gain reduction, or turn it down by 3 dB there after that saturation knob plugin. And that, my friend,
but I don't know what she.
That is a little run through of this indie pop mix when it comes to EQ, compression, and saturation. So now, before we wrap this up, I'm gonna just go step by step, one by one, and I'm gonna just hit play, and then I want you to feel the effect of the plugins that we're adding. So here is, let me come in here because I wanna add the compressor, then the EQ. So I'm gonna go ahead and just hit play, and then I'll turn these on one by one. Here.
Right now, won't you stay? Whoa, Jessica, Jessica. Oh, won't you stay? Oh, Jessica, Jessica. Oh, yeah. For you say goodbye, stay a while. For you say goodbye, stay a while. For you say goodbye, stay a while. This is all I ask of you now, Jessica.
All right, that is it. Now, one more thing that I actually thought of just now that I'll mention very, very quickly is notice how the meter over here, the average volume is hanging around like -24, -22. Please, please, guys, don't clip whatever you do. So if you're dragging in, or if you're in your mix session and everything is cranked and it is clipping or it's hitting way up here, you don't need that. You really, really don't. You're not adding, this is not the analog domain. You're not benefiting at all from almost clipping, and you're certainly not benefiting from clipping. So make sure, especially when you start your mixes or when you're just throughout your mix, check your output and make sure that it is pretty low. You can always turn it up in mastering when you're ready to finish the song, when you're ready to use a limiter, whatever. Just please don't clip. Start at a super low volume when you're mixing vocals as well as every other part of the mix, okay? So there you go, my friend. That is EQ, compression, and saturation for an indie pop vocal mix. In the next video, we're going to talk about reverb and delay, so it's going to be a hell of a time. It's going to be super fun, so I will see you there.